Welcome to Very Rich Stories, where you will see stories of betrayal and secrets and twists in real life. And now, urge for the surge. After hours or when meeting very beautiful, vivacious women, Lawrence always introduced himself as Lance. Well, not immediately, not obtrusively, not rudely, but in a charming way and eventually. Lawrence was the name on formal paperwork, official documents, on tax forms, leases, on wedding licenses. Lawrence was no stranger to marriage licenses or marriage certificates. Lance was the man who showed up after work and after dark. Since he married Amber, well, at least since the first year, every evening followed the same rhythm. Lawrence came home from work quietly, keys placed neatly on the counter, tie loosened, shoes set side by side. Sometimes he'd eat dinner with his wife, but most nights he'd say he had just eaten or he had a late meeting and would get a bite while he was out. He gave no real concern that she had cooked a lovely meal for them to enjoy, or what her evening might look like. He'd just leave her alone. He barely looked at his wife, not out of anger, out of habit. She would be sitting somewhere nearby, the couch, the table, the kitchen, pretending to be occupied while listening to his footsteps move past her. "Hey," she'd say, "hey." He'd reply. Then he'd disappear into the bedroom. The shower would turn on within minutes. She'd sit there, already knowing what came next. When the water stopped and the bedroom door opened again, Lawrence was gone. The man who stepped out was lighter, sharper, more awake. This man checked his reflection, changed shirts, sprayed cologne. This man smiled at his phone. This man was Lance. "Going out?" she'd ask. "Just for a bit," Lance would say. He always said it that way. Just for a bit. As if time bent itself around him. At first, she went with him. This was Lawrence, but Lance was who showed up on first dates. And for a married man, he shouldn't still be having first dates, but he was. In restaurants, clubs, sports bars, Lance knew how to make an entrance without trying. He'd scan the crowd and pick the most available-looking woman, walk right up to her, and show her more interest than anyone had shown her in months. He listened closely to her every word, no matter how mundane, asked questions that made people feel interesting, remembered details that didn't matter until they did. He had a way of leaning in that felt intentional, a way of pausing before answering that made people feel heard. Women didn't fall for him all at once, but he had a secret reserve of charm that no one seemed to know about, but he drew deeply from it, at will. He and Amber had a whirlwind romance and had married a year ago. It was fun, well, for the first few months. Then Lance started to drift, his attention, his conversation, his interest in Amber, in their marriage. Drifted. At home, well, when he was at home, his wife used to watch him from the kitchen. Not suspiciously, not anxiously, just noticing. Almost surprised sometimes that he was at home. It had started to seem that Lance's shoes didn't even belong in that house anymore. Lance was good with his phone, but not in a way that looked secretive. He wasn't hiding it. He wasn't guarding it. He behaved as if it was his phone and he had the right to do anything with it, look at anything, talk or text to anyone he wanted to. No apologies. That's what made it confusing. As far as Lance was concerned, there was no reason to be hesitant or to have any type of guilt. He'd smile at something on the screen, then look up and kiss Amber's forehead. Ask her how her day was. Every now and then he'd offer to help with dinner, like nothing was wrong. Amber decided then that nothing was wrong. This must just be how he is. This may just be how marriage and life is. Maybe nothing was wrong, but nothing was fully right either. When she talked, he nodded. When she laughed, he smiled. When she reached for him, he reached back. And still something felt unfinished. It wasn't until later that she understood. His attention was always already halfway gone. The first woman outside the marriage didn't start as a betrayal. She started as a conversation, a comment. Clarice. Once he found out what her frustration was as they sat too close in a bar that a married man wasn't even supposed to be in, he leaned in to listen. Clarice thought this was a very dear comment, or finally someone was understanding her. She told herself that. He told her that. He said things like, "I haven't talked like this in a long time. I feel like you get me. I forgot what this felt like." She didn't ask what this was. She felt it too strongly to interrupt it with logic. He dug into his charm file and had the same frustration. Out of his well of charm, he was the most attentive, compassionate, caring person ever. When he'd had enough of pretending to care, he said, "I'm going to cheer you up. Let's order another round of drinks." Clarice thought that meant something, and she let Lance lead her to his own home that very night. Clarice thought she had won something clean. She saw a house that looked like a home and thought she had met a stable man and that she had won a jackpot of some kind. Clarice saw Amber sitting on the couch waiting for her husband to come home. She saw the shock on Amber's face. She saw the involuntary tears, and she saw Amber storm off to one of the bedrooms down the hall. She didn't see herself as the reason a marriage ended. She saw herself as the reason he was finally honest. Clarice was honored. She felt chosen. She felt valued. By the time Lawrence came home from work the next day, the place was echoing and empty. Amber was gone, and she had taken away everything that made a house a home, because Amber was the home. Lance moved quickly, justifying in his mind that Amber had gotten so boring anyway. He insisted on a quick divorce, and less than 2 weeks later he married Clarice. Because even though Amber was his sun and moon and stars and his reason for being, that was last year. This year, Clarice is all the constellations in the night sky that he would want to see. He moved too quickly, if anyone had been watching closely, but not too quickly for Clarice. She was now the lady of the house, and she cherished that position. She liked how decisive it felt, how certain. At first, Lance couldn't get enough of Clarice. They were like high schoolers, texting constantly, up all night together, plans made quickly and kept enthusiastically. She felt chosen. Not just preferred, not convenient, but chosen. And that feeling is intoxicating for her. Clarice was an emotional and hormonal surge for him. She didn't notice how often he needed stimulation until she was already invested, already moved in, already married to Lance. After only about 3 months, Clarice noticed Lance's constant background noise. Music always playing, TV on even when no one was watching. He couldn't even sleep unless the TV was on. Clarice was starting to become exhausted from the constant TV lights flickering and the constant noise. Silence made him especially restless. Peace made him itchy. When things slowed, he filled the space, with outings, with plans, with people, with his phone. At night, she would lie beside him and feel the glow before she saw it, scrolling, always scrolling, not hiding it, not apologizing, just looking, looking, looking. She told herself it was nothing. She even thought that at least he is entertaining himself, because leaving his entertainment up to her was wearing her out. Everyone scrolls, she rationalized, but the scrolling didn't stop when she talked. It didn't stop when she reached for him. It didn't stop when the room was quiet. It only stopped when something new appeared, a notification, a laugh, a spark. That's when she felt it for the first time. That tightening, that familiar dread she didn't yet recognize as understanding. She tried to bring it up once, not accusing, just curious. He smiled, reassured her, said she was overthinking. He was always gentle when dismissing concerns. That made it harder to argue. She resigned herself to this is just how he is. This must be what marriage is about. Lance had become Lawrence again. A few weeks later, for the first time in months, Lawrence came home from work, showered, changed, put on cologne, and went out with hardly a word to Clarice. Clarice's mouth fell open as the door shut. She called him to see where was he going. No answer. She texted him. He did not answer. It got to be midnight, 12:30 a.m. He still had not answered any of her calls. At nearly 1 a.m., he stumbled through the front door. The second woman arrived just like Clarice had. This one? Her name was Jennifer. She arrived the same way the first one had. Clarice thought she was having an out-of-body experience when Lance stumbled through the door, hugged up on this woman. Clarice could see herself sitting on the couch just as Amber had been on that couch a year ago when she came through the midnight door, or their house with tipsy Lance. He introduced this woman as Jennifer, and Clarice just stood there stunned, sizing her up. Clarice thought to herself, I've been the perfect wife, the perfect woman, fun, fulfilling his every need. What is this all about? I don't deserve to be replaced. I don't even need to be replaced. In that bar that night, Lance, through conversation, through attention, through that same feeling of being seen, had a moment with her, and he brought her home because he wanted more than a moment. He wanted a night. He had the urge for the surge to boost his ego and his body count, and the thrill of pursuit and the thrill of the catch. Only this time, Clarice, the former mistress, recognized the pattern. Now it all started to make sense. The late replies, the distracted presence, the way he seemed energized after certain interactions. She didn't confront him right away. Instead, she watched. She noticed the next few days, because she hadn't left him, not yet, how he spoke about boredom like it was a warning sign, how he described relationships as things that shouldn't feel like work. She noticed how often he reminisced about beginnings. Everything was great at the beginning, right? Then she noticed how little he talked about sustaining anything. One night, when Lance was out, she searched a phrase he'd used casually, something about how things lose their spark. That's when she found the word, limerence. She didn't like how closely it fit. His name, Lawrence. What is this about? The obsession, the intensity, the crash, the way some people mistake chemical excitement for love. She sat with that information quietly, and suddenly every moment rearranged itself. The marriage hadn't ended because it failed. It ended because it stabilized. The relationship she was in wasn't ending because she wasn't enough. It was ending because she had become familiar. She wasn't special. He had told her she was special, and that Amber was not special. No, the problem wasn't Amber, it was Lance or Lawrence or whatever he was calling himself lately. This realization didn't come with tears. It came with humiliation. Because she finally understood the first wife. She finally understood Amber. Not as a rival, but as a predecessor. She had helped Amber lose him the same way. These days, Lance barely looked at his wife, Clarice. Not out of anger, out of habit. This is exactly how he had treated Amber. She would be sitting somewhere nearby, the couch, the table, or in the kitchen, pretending to be occupied while listening to his footsteps move past her. "Hey," she'd say. "Hey," he'd reply. Then he'd disappear into the bedroom. The shower would turn on within minutes. She'd sit there, already knowing what came next. When the water stopped and the bedroom door opened again, Lawrence was gone. The man who stepped out was lighter, sharper, more awake. This man checked his reflection, changed shirts, sprayed cologne. This man smiled at his phone. This man was Lance. "Going out?" she'd ask. "Just for a bit," Lance would say. He always said it that way, just for a bit, as if time bent itself around him. At first, she went with him. Back when they were newly married, she believed marriage meant staying up late together, laughing too loudly, waking up tired and satisfied. She remembered those nights, the way people looked at them when they entered rooms, the way Lance seemed to come alive once the sun went down. She married Lance. That's what she told herself when things began to change. About a year in, Lance stopped inviting her, not all at once, just gradually. "You'd be bored," he'd say. "You don't like those places. You should just stay in tonight." Sometimes she did hate those places. She hated the noise, the standing around, the way conversations never really went anywhere. But she hated being left behind more. Lawrence stayed home. Lawrence sat quietly, flipped channels, looked tired for reasons he never explained. Lawrence bored her, and Lawrence felt it. He noticed the shift in her attention, the way she no longer lit up when he entered the room. He decided it was her fault. "She's changed," he thought. "She's no fun anymore." The nights stacked up. She watched the clock, watched her phone. Told herself married people didn't need to be together all the time. But marriage, she learned, shouldn't feel like waiting. He spent most of his money chasing nights that didn't last. Once Amber had moved out, the other woman, Clarice, had moved in quickly. She loved the idea of rescue. She decorated, cooked, listened to him complain about his ex. They married, and then marriage did what it always did. It asked for presence, routine, stability. Lance tried. He came home earlier, sat through dinners, watched television, and without ceremony, he became Lawrence again. They both noticed it. Lawrence bored her, she missed Lance, and Lawrence blamed her for it. The nights stretched again, and one night, history repeated itself. The door opened late, voices spilled in. Lance stood there again, drunk, careless, with another woman on his arm. The wife recognized the scene instantly. She had been the other woman once, and now she understood. This wasn't a game. It was a cycle, It was a cycle she didn't want to repeat or keep repeating, so she decided to speak seriously with him, and if that didn't work, she would start making her plans. Lance didn't argue when she finally spoke. He didn't deny it, he just looked tired. And that was worse, because it meant this wasn't a mistake, it was a pattern. Some people want partnership, some people want connection. Lance wanted stimulation. His aliveness was measured by satisfying his urge for the surge. Some people have relationships, some have situationships. Lance had a stimulationship problem. He had a near-constant urge for the surge. For stimulationships, he wasn't chasing women, he was chasing the surge, and when the surge faded, he moved on. Again. The next day when Lawrence was at work, Clarice packed up all her things and quietly moved out. She took all the things that made a house a home with her. The new sheets, the bed pillows, the matching dishes in the kitchen, the pots and pans. Everything she had provided to the home when she was rescuing Lance from that horrible first wife of his, Amber, the one who didn't understand him and didn't stimulate him. Jennifer, who was the home-wrecking chisel that broke Lance and Clarice up, was just as much of a surge seeker as Lance was, and so she had moved on. Weeks passed. The house was quiet again. Quiet made him restless. So he started going out more. Lance went out one night, and the next woman started as a conversation. She let him talk. She didn't give him the blueprint of her life or the blueprint and history of her failures, hurts, and disappointments. She let him talk. She was masterful at this, and he didn't even realize that the tables had flipped. He told her he hadn't talked like that in a long time, that he felt alive again. She encouraged him, but made him think that his pickup lines were working on her. They weren't. Her technique was working on him. She didn't interrupt it with logic. But she had heard all this kind of talk before, and she wanted him to keep talking. Kayla resisted going home with Lance that night, and that intrigued him. Now she was a conquest. He started paying her so much attention, like he was love-bombing her so much that it almost got on her nerves. But it didn't. She was taking digital and written notes of all of his behavior. That's when he had met her. Kayla. This one, Kayla would change his life. She wasn't impressed. She asked questions, but not flirtatious ones. She asked curious questions. She stayed, but not the way the others had. She watched. She came to his house with a stayover bag, and he noticed a big textbook in her bag. So he asked her about it. She told him the truth. She was in grad school studying psychology. Her thesis focused on novelty-seeking behavior in adult relationships. "Yes," she said calmly, "I'm studying you." He was shocked, at first flattered. Then when realization struck, he was flabbergasted. She described him perfectly, the beginnings, the obsessions, the crashes. "But we are dating," he queried. "Yes," she said. "How could you date me and study me? I want to make a good grade on my final thesis, so once you found me, I went full immersion." "But I found you?" "Well, sorta. I had studied you from afar for weeks. You can't write about me. I can't. Who is going to know that it's you that I'm writing about? It's not like I'm going to use your name. Get out," he demanded. She gathered her few things and left without drama. For the first time in a long time, Lance was alone with Lawrence. The silence didn't feel boring. It felt exposing. He imagined himself reduced to data, charts, paragraphs on a page, a pattern with a name. So his well of charm wasn't a superpower. It was a pattern, predictable, common even. He buried his head in his hands. How had his life come to this? But that need that he feels, that urge, it's real. It's really real. What am I going to do? He asked aloud to no one. If he didn't change, he would end up alone. He'd end up documented, a statistic. One afternoon, about 2 weeks later, he stood in a quiet hallway. On a door there was a name and listed credentials. Behavioral psychology, attachment patterns, adult novelty dependency. His hand hovered over the doorknob. There was no surge driving him this time, just a choice, and a desire to heal. For the first time, Lance felt accountable, and that scared him enough to reach for the door. Thank you for watching Very Rich Stories. Please join our family and subscribe. Share this with your friends and leave a comment.